Welcome to Football Game Plan to FCS Kickoff, presented by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook, and we have an action-packed show today as we break down Week 8 in the FCS. Here's what we have on tap for this episode. I know we didn't get to it last week, but I promise you we will in this episode, and that's our mid-season top 25. We will also take you around the entire FCS and give you all of the news, notes, and tidbits in our FCS whip-around segments. And as always, we'll give you a ton of game previews that you won't find anywhere else. Week 7 in the FCS was both exciting and filled with some surprises, and we'll jump right into our 4-minute offense here on the FCS Kickoff, talking about one of those surprises as we saw 3 unbeaten teams fall last week. Harvard, Chattanooga, and the reigning national champion North Dakota State Bison all lost last week in closely contested games. Harvard lost to Holy Cross, which was very surprising considering how up and down the Crusaders have been all season long. Chattanooga took one on the chin to fellow unbeaten Citadel 22-14 in a great SoCon matchup, and North Dakota State lost to South Dakota State in the Dakota Marker game, thanks in part to an outstanding effort from quarterback Taryn Christian, which we'll talk about more in a few minutes. All 3 teams are looking to bounce back versus conference and league opponents this week. We have our first coaching replacement of the season and hopefully our last one, as Delaware moved on from head coach Dave Brock after a 2-4 start and a 19-22 record overall in his 4th season in Newark. This is tough because I personally think Brock is a great coach. Defensively, the Blue Hens have been very good, but they could never get their offense, more in particular their passing game, squared away. And in my opinion, that is what ultimately doomed him and cost him his job. Now, co-defensive coordinator Dennis Doughton Carter will take over on an interim basis. The school says that a national search will begin to immediately find a permanent successor. Now, Coach Doughton Carter will also be Delaware's first African-American head coach in program history. On a positive note, the Marist Red Foxes are on a 3-game winning streak and have evened their record to 3-3. Head coach Jim Parody, in his 25th season, is a coaching vet in the game and has dialed up the right calls, pushed the right buttons to right this ship, and has him right in the thick of the Pioneer League race. Now, they're getting great play right now from quarterback Mike White, and combined with opportunistic defensive play, Marist looks like they could be a serious threat to the top of the league. This week they host Davidson on homecoming weekend in Poughkeepsie. The Lehigh Mountain Hawks pushed their record to 4-2 last weekend with the win over Georgetown, but what was most impressive about that feat was that they did it mainly with their backup quarterback. The Mountain Hawks' second-string QB Brad Mays stepped in for an injured Nick Shavnisky and proceeded to keep his offense on pace and ended up throwing for 247 yards on 19 of 26 attempts and 2 touchdowns. Now here's the thing, Shavnisky wasn't playing bad prior to the injury, going 7 out of 12 for 101 yards and a touchdown. And we've seen this before with these guys, and what a great situation to have if you're head coach Andy Cohen, knowing you have 2 legit starters when most teams struggle to find just one. Let's take a look back at last week and hand out some awards. Our Offensive Player of the Week award goes to South Dakota State's quarterback Taryn Christian, who threw for 303 yards and 2 touchdowns and also ran for 141 yards in the upset victory over number 1 North Dakota State. Christian did what he had to do on 3rd downs to keep the Jackrabbits alive and ultimately making them victorious. Defensive Player of the Game goes to Georgetown Hoyas linebacker Javion Butler, who finished the game versus Lehigh with 11 tackles, a tackle for loss, and an amazing interception. He also had another interception that was nullified by a penalty. Now, if you haven't seen Butler play, you're missing one of the best defensive players in the FCS. He's a linebacker by definition, but he plays like a strong safety and has put together an All-American type season so far. And finally, our Special Teams Player of the Week goes to the Citadel Bulldogs kicker Cody Clark, who nailed 2 clutch field goals that helped the Bulldogs remain undefeated and in sole possession of first place in the SoCon in the victory over Chattanooga. Now, we'll be back after this quick commercial break.
New York City is the largest market for broadcast media. It's the epicenter for the TV and radio industry. If you ever had a dream of working in the thrilling broadcast world, then make it a reality by going to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. CSB has helped numerous people get a job with hands-on training and a learn-by-doing mentality. You will learn all of the high-tech equipment in the TV and radio studios. From hosting your own radio show, to being a news or sports anchor, operating a camera in the TV studio, or editing audio and video, the choice is yours. Graduates from CSB have gone on to work at some of the major companies in the industry. To get more information, call 1-800-TV-RADIO or check us out at gocsb.com. Your road to success starts here at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
In the Big South Conference, as we look at the standings, things are pretty tight so far at this point of the season. You see Monmouth has dug themselves into a 0-2 conference hole, but they still have a winning record on the season at 4-3. The surprise has been how well Kennesaw State has played this year. The Owls are 4-2 on the season, 2-0 on the road, and that undefeated mark will be put to the test this week as they travel to Boiling Springs, North Carolina to take on the Gardner-Webb running Bulldogs as we take a look at this week's schedule. Now, Charleston Southern faces a Presbyterian squad that knocked off Monmouth last week, moving their record to 2-4 in the year. Keep an eye on the Liberty Flames as they try to move their winning streak to 3 against the aforementioned Monmouth Hawks. I wouldn't classify the Citadel over Chattanooga as an upset, but Holy Cross over Harvard and South Dakota State over North Dakota State can definitely be called an upset. Now we'll take a look at a few games of intrigue and teams that should be on upset alert this weekend in the FCS.
The Hampton Pirates travel down to Tallahassee to take on the Florida A&M Rattlers, and if you're FAMU in this ball game, you have to be feeling pretty confident about your chances. The Rattlers are 2-2 in conference and winners of 2 of their last 3 games. Head coach Alex Wood looks like he has his guys slithering in the right direction, so there's a chance that the Rattlers could strike the Pirates in this one. But I ultimately believe that what you'll see is too much wide receiver Rashawn Proctor and a Pirates defense that does a great job in getting off the field on 3rd down. I think they avoid sleepwalking in this one and get the victory. In the Southland Conference tilt, Houston Baptist and Southeastern Louisiana meet up in Hammond, Louisiana, and this game makes the list because I've been impressed with the Huskies. I think they've been vastly improved this season. Linebacker Garrett Dolan is once again one of the best defensive players in the Southland Conference, and we've seen the Huskies look strong in their 2 victories on the season. But what hasn't been pleasant is their play inside the red zone offensively. This is where I think quarterback Justin Allo and the Southeastern Louisiana Lions will take advantage, and while their defense may give up some points to Houston Baptist, their offense shouldn't have any problems inside the 20-yard line, putting up 3 or 7 on the board. It won't be pretty, but it'll be effective. I like the Lions. Anyone who faces Presbyterian should be on upset alert, as this is a team that's fundamentally sound and does a great job of not beating themselves. That's how the Blue Hose were able to knock off Monmouth last week, and they have to be very excited to face the Charleston Southern Bucks. And we know the Bucks will bring their vaunted option attack with them each and every week, and they are well rested and are coming off of a bye. Now, teams that usually come off of a bye tend to open up a bit flat, which is why I think this game will be close early, but look for the Bucks to start to pull away late and avoid the upset. This is a tricky game in the CAA. New Hampshire has shown that they have had issues on defense, and Towson, despite their struggles this season with injuries, have shown the ability to move the ball just a bit on offense. Right now, if you're the Wildcats, the game plan should be do the little things like protecting the football, not getting penalties, making sure tackles. Those things, I think, are the non-negotiables for the Wildcats in this contest. The Tigers have lost a few heartbreakers this season, most recently last week versus Dartmouth. I think what we'll see in another very close CAA game where the Tigers, playing at home, will put together a clean performance versus New Hampshire and come away with a homecoming win. New Hampshire has some leakage along their offensive line in the pass protection department, and I think that's where I believe the Towson Tigers will be able to have success defensively. The Skyhawks travel to Atlanta to take on Georgia State. This game features a high-octane offense and an opportunistic defense, both of which are describing UT Martin. Georgia State was a bowl team last year and looked completely different this season. Where the Skyhawks can take advantage is with their ground game. The Panthers have given up over 240 yards rushing per game on the ground, and outside of the Wisconsin game, where they had a chance to pull off the upset, they've been completely out of sync in all of their losses. Now, UT Martin has the ability to play with both tempo and pace, also has the ability to switch up styles and run the football. I expect running back Jamie Bowe to have some success, which will open things up for quarterback Troy Cook and that passing game en route to an upset victory over the Georgia State Panthers. This is a really good crosstown matchup between Tennessee State and Vanderbilt. For the Tigers in this game, they have to continue to play with balance on offense, and I think this is something that they've done extremely well all season long. Right now, their offensive line has looked like the best in the FCS, led by Justin Dunker. Defensively, the key will be for the back seven to make plays consistently in space, and we've seen this defense play opportunistic football all year long, especially versus the pass. Vanderbilt is coming off a big-time upset of their own by knocking off the Georgia Bulldogs 17-16, thanks in part to a key stop by linebacker Zach Cunningham. I think Vandy's defense comes to play each and every Saturday. The question is which Commodore offense plans to show up with them on each and every Saturday. To me, that's the biggest unknown right now, and I have to take Tennessee State in the upset. If you haven't seen the Tigers play defense from their defensive line all the way to their secondary with cornerback Ezra Robinson, they are strong at every level and will do a great job of stifling the Vanderbilt offense.
The biggest news this week in the CAA is the firing of Delaware head coach Dave Brock. To me, Brock did a great job in the recruiting and developing of talented players department, but like I mentioned earlier in the show, the lack of consistent quarterback play cost him games and ultimately cost him his job. Everywhere else in the conference looks pretty stable. Looking at the standings, you see how competitive these guys are out of conference and how badly they beat each other up within the CAA. Now, Elon has done a remarkable job this season. They are 2-4, but I like what head coach Rich Skrosky is doing with this Phoenix, and the future definitely looks bright. Now, this week on the CAA schedule, there's no shortage of statement games, so to speak, here in week 8. Stony Brook and Delaware will draw a lot of attention for obvious reasons. Albany and Villanova is a key one as well, as also is Towson and New Hampshire, as the Tigers look to stop the bleeding and stabilize their season. We'll stay in the northeastern part of the country as we start to preview some games, and we have a few good ones on Friday night. We'll start in New Haven, Connecticut, as the Yale Bulldogs play host to the Penn Quakers.
Friday night football at the Yale Bowl as the Penn Quakers bring their three-headed offensive monster into this contest. Quarterback Alec Torgerson, running back Trey Solomon, and wide receiver Justin Watson. The Quakers have to get off to an early start and also keep their foot on the gas offensively to keep the pressure on that Yale Bulldogs offense to maximize their own possessions. I feel like Yale is starting to settle in and find themselves on both sides of the ball. Offensively, if they can run the football against this Quaker defense, I think they'll be just fine. Where I see Penn winning this ball game is with their own ground game. Yale's secondary, I think, matches up very well with that Quakers receiving core. I just think the Bulldogs front seven will have a tough time slowing down Solomon and getting off the field. Friday night game is between Duquesne and St. Francis in a pivotal Northeast Conference matchup. This is a strength versus strength type of game, in my opinion. Duquesne can run the heck out of the football with A.J. Hines, and St. Francis is impenetrable versus the run, only giving up 2.9 yards a carry. We know the Dukes have tremendous talent on the perimeter with Wayne Capers, and he'll be matched up with one of the top corners in the country regardless of division in Lorenzo Jerome, who already has 6 interceptions on the season. Defensively for the Dukes, linebacker Christian Kuntz leads the team with 15.5 TFLs and 7 sacks, and he'll be in charge of making sure the Red Flash's talented tailback Marcus Bagley, who averages 104 yards a game, doesn't get going. Right now, I can't trust the Dukes' offensive line versus that defensive front of St. Francis. The pressure in conjunction with the back-end coverage will force quarterback Denon Beichel into some errant throws. Now, this will be the type of game that stolen possessions and will ultimately win the game for each other team. And I think the Red Flash with the better defense will be able to steal a few and get the win. Break up the Black Bears as they travel to Rhode Island to face the Rams, and head coach Joe Harasmiak has his team riding a 3-game winning streak, and it's because they've got things steady on offense. The Black Bears are averaging 30-plus points a game on this 3-game win streak, and when you look at senior quarterback Dan Collins, he's played some really good ball during this stretch. Defensively, they've always been tough, especially within the front seven, and they're facing a Rams team that is still having issues at quarterback, which has really stunted the growth of their offense. It allows teams to zero in on their ground game, and then they struggle to stay on the field. Their defense plays very hard, led by linebacker Adam Parker, but it won't be enough in this one. Look for Maine to push their win streak to 4. A battle between two ranked teams as Albany travels to Villanova. Both teams are coming off of losses. Albany is on a 2-game skid, while Villanova got shut out last week versus Richmond. I think both teams are eerily similar in their offensive approach. Both are run-heavy teams that rely heavily on their quarterback in the running game. Where this game will be won or lost is in the trenches. To me, that's where the Villanova Wildcats have the advantage. I think Albany's running back Elijah Ebotoken-Hanks is tremendous, but he won't have the room to run up front against this Wildcats front seven, which will put a lot of pressure on quarterback Nevin Sussman in that passing game. Look for Villanova to get the Great Danes to break their tendencies early en route to a victory on homecoming weekend. This is a really good game in the Patriot League between Lehigh and Holy Cross, and for the Mountain Hawks in this contest, I want to know if they can have an encore defensive performance like we saw last week in the 35-3 victory over Georgetown. Lehigh's defensive line was excellent in that ball game, and the linebackers had a field day getting from sideline to sideline. Offensively, whether Nick Shevnisky is 100% or if they have to go with Brad Mays, they'll be just fine at quarterback. Holy Cross is coming off an upset win over Harvard. The Crusaders quarterback Jeff Wade looked extremely efficient and got a lot of different targets involved in that offense. The biggest matchup to me involves their defense. Can the Crusaders run the ball, and can they stop the run? Those have been the two biggest bugaboos for them this season. I just think that Lehigh is playing at an unbelievable level right now. They'll avoid the letdown and pick up their 5th victory on the season and maintain a stranglehold on first place in the Patriot League. Huge game in the Ivy League with first place on the line as Harvard travels to Princeton. The Crimson were upset last week by Holy Cross, and what was the most shocking part about that loss was that they were dominated up front, which is unheard of. This week, they face a team that'll throw a lot at them offensively, and it'll be up to the front seven to remain disciplined in their assignments and for the secondary to not get caught peeking in the backfield. On the offensive side, obviously, they'll need better play up front, but the Crimson have to get back to the formula of making it a boring game, so to speak, and really establishing the running game from the onset. For the Tigers, since the defensive collapse against Lehigh, they have quietly gotten better each and every week. Defensive lineman Henry Schlossberg and linebacker Rohan Hilton have played really good ball this year, and offensively, despite the amount of formations, personnel groupings, and substitutions you'll see from them per game, they've quietly have good balance on offense. And I like Princeton in this game. This just feels like a different Harvard offense, and I think the Tigers will smell blood, or crimson for that matter, and take advantage.
With all the latest in the Northeast Conference, here on the FCS Kickoff Show, I'm Matt Chabatari. Week 8 is upon us in the NEC, and with it comes some top matchups in the conference. But first, let's review where everyone stands after 4 weeks of play in the conference. At the top of the league are the Wagner Seahawks at 2-0, 4-2 overall, tied with the St. Francis Red Flash at 2-0 as well, 4-3 overall. The Duquesne Dukes are 1-0 in the conference, 4-2 overall, while the Sacred Heart Pioneers are 0-1 so far in the NEC after the surprising loss in Week 5 to the Wagner Seahawks, but are 5-1 overall. Central Connecticut State and Robert Morris round out the NEC, both 0-2 in the conference so far, with Central Connecticut having a slightly better record at 1-5 and Robert Morris stuck at 1-6. Looking around the league at Week 7 action, it's hard not to come away impressed with Coach Villarreal's St. Francis Red Flash complete team effort in their 38-3 home NEC blowout win over Dalton Easton and the Bryant Bulldogs' high-powered offense. Easton was held to a season-low 167 yards through the air with 2 INTs and sacked 4 times on the day. St. Francis' defensive dominance was largely due to the efforts of junior defensive back Jalen Wells and senior middle linebacker Solomon Liano. Liano finished the day with 8 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a pass breakup, and a hit on the quarterback, while Wells, who was named the NEC Defensive Player of the Week, had 8 stops on the day with 2 pass breakups and an interception in return for a touchdown. For Coach Villarreal's team, who started the year 1-3 after 4 straight road games with losses to ranked opponents in number 10 Montana and number 23 Albany, have now enjoyed some home cooking, winning 3 straight at home in Loretto, Pennsylvania. Looking ahead to Week 8, St. Francis are hosting the defending champion Duquesne Dukes Friday night in Loretto. Zach Dreher and this Red Flash offense are going to look to continue their recent upward trend offensively over the past few weeks. An X factor in this potentially tight defensive affair has to be preseason first-team All-American senior safety and return specialist Lorenzo Jerome, who has 6 INTs through 7 weeks. Jerome's electric return ability and ball-hawk nature over the middle is something that can cause fits for the Dukes' offense and special teams. Looking across the field at Duquesne, who are 4-2 on the season and are very close to having a 5-game winning streak, head into this big Friday night NEC road matchup at St. Francis with eyes on defending their 2015 crown. One player that has solidified his place on Duquesne has to be freshman running back A.J. Hines, who we have spotlighted previously on the show. Leading the NEC with 114.8 yards per game at the midway point of the season and being named the NEC Rookie of the Week 5 times this season, Hines could be a major reason why Duquesne go into St. Francis and win. Coming off their NEC opener, where they won over Robert Morris 31-24 on the backs of Hines having 182 yards on the ground, 246 yards from scrimmage, combined with senior quarterback Dylan Beichel's 258 yards through the air and 3 touchdowns, the Dukes offense looks to keep it going this week. Last season's 30-20 Duquesne win in late November in Pittsburgh was a winner-take-all game for both teams, with the Dukes winning the outright NEC title and an automatic bid into the FCS playoffs after the win. All-time Duquesne leads the series 35-7 overall. Predictions for this one later in the segment. Speaking of Jeff Benezak's Robert Morris Colonials, who are 0-2 in the NEC and 1-6 overall, they head to Fairfield, Connecticut to take on Mark Knopfler's Sacred Heart Pioneers this weekend. For a team that has struggled to put up points, averaging only 10.7 points per game through 7 weeks. Looking across the field at Sacred Heart, who got back into the win column this past weekend with a 31-24 non-conference win over Cornell at home, going to 5-1 on the season and receiving votes in the Stats FCS poll despite their Week 6 blowout loss to Wagner in the NEC opener 45-20 on the road. Sacred Heart has gotten off to a great start this season on the backs of the two-headed monster they have at running back and senior Jose Emilparia, who added 87 more yards on the ground against Cornell, and senior Nate Chavis, who went off with 160 yards on 24 carries and 2 first-half touchdowns on his way to NEC Offensive Player of the Week honors. Look for Sacred Heart to keep their winning ways going at home against Robert Morris as he uses their stout defense to hold down the lackluster offense of the Colonials. The Wagner Seahawks, meanwhile, 2-0 in the conference, are at the top of the NEC at the midway point of the season and are coming off a big road win over Central Connecticut State 25-21. With 15 unanswered points in the fourth quarter for this Seahawks team, who were trailing 21-10 at half, moving them to 4-2 overall in the season. Coach Hoftailing has to be proud of a much-improved defense in 2016 that has stepped up their efforts after halftime, only giving up 4.8 points per game in the second half this season. As Wagner looks to continue to build on their impressive 2016 NEC campaign, they take on the Bryant Bulldogs Saturday in Rhode Island. In another road matchup for the Seahawks, they look to tame the Bulldogs' high-powered offense led by senior quarterback Dalton Easton. Across the field, Bryant looks for some home cooking as they head home after their 38-3 shellacking they received on the road at St. Francis with few positives on both sides of the ball. Look for Wagner's junior running back, Denzel Knight, to continue his impressive season, averaging 84 yards a game, but his 9.2 yards per carry are what really impresses you as the Seahawks looks to use their running game to keep the ball out of Dalton Easton's hands.
Things are getting really interesting in the Pioneer Football League in Week 8. Looking at the standings, the Marist Red Foxes have thrusted themselves into the number 2 spot with their 3-0 record in conference, sandwiching themselves in between San Diego and Dayton. Valparaiso is another surprise team this year as Coach Cicchini has been playing really good ball. Moving over to the schedule this week, Jacksonville and Morehead State play in a big one. The Dolphins have won 10 straight games in this series, but last year we saw the Eagles lose a close one, 30-26, and we'll be looking to break that streak this weekend. Stetson and Campbell is another intriguing game. The Hatters take 2 steps forward and 2 steps backward as they have to find that level of consistency. Now, the Campbells came into the season with a ton of justifiable buzz, and they are still trying to find their own level of consistency on the season. And what an opportunity Valparaiso has this week as they try to upset the Toreros in sunny San Diego. Check pioneer-football.org for times and where you can watch these games. Things are starting to heat up in the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference as it's starting to look like a two-team race at the top with North Carolina A&T and North Carolina Central. Speaking of North Carolina A&T, running back Tariq Cohen posted his third straight 200-yard game on the ground last week versus Bethune-Cookman. What Cohen has done this season is nothing short of remarkable. He's consistently performing at a high level when teams know he's the first and sometimes second option on this Aggies football team. We also saw him return punts last week, and the one punt he returned was for a touchdown. Looking at this week's schedule, Norfolk State and Bethune-Cookman meet up in Norfolk, Virginia. I expected much more from both teams this season, but like I've said before, both squads are well coached and equally talented. Now look for a ton of points to be scored in that one. Morgan State and North Carolina Central is another big one this week, and the Bears, who are ineligible for the Celebration Bowl because of APR violations, have played really good ball this season and could help out North Carolina A&T by knocking off the very strong Eagles. Moving on to the Mid-Atlantic region of games this week, the Monmouth Hawks are looking to rebound from a loss last week to Presbyterian as they travel down to Lynchburg, Virginia to take on the Liberty Flames in a key Big South matchup.
The Hawks are looking to get back on the winning track after losing to Presbyterian last week, and in order for that to happen tomorrow versus Liberty, quarterback Cody Williams has to get off to a better start. Monmouth shows the ability to run the football, control the line of scrimmage, but if they can't get their passing game rolling early, it makes them easier to defend. The Flames are on a 2-game winning streak, and I like what I've seen from these guys offensively. They're moving the football very well, capitalizing on their opponent's turnovers and misfortunes, and they are playing really good special teams. This is their second conference game, so they're trying to stake their claim in the Big South race if they are able to get this victory at home. Now, defensively, you have to have some concerns about whether or not they can be effective versus the run. That's the biggest battle they'll have to win in this ball game, and I don't think they can. Monmouth is very strong in the trenches on both sides. Look for a bounce-back game for the Hawks offense as they'll knock off Liberty.
Down in the SoCon, we saw a great game between two of the conference's best as the Citadel topped Chattanooga. Sanford's quarterback Devlin Hodges had himself a day last week versus Furman, going 35 of 50 for 435 yards and 5 touchdown passes. What can he do for an encore performance? As we take a look at this week's schedule, he'll be facing a Western Carolina team that has very good talent on the back end. Now, the Keydets of VMI will try to hand the Mocs their second loss of the season, and if you love option football, Wofford versus the Citadel will be a fantastic watch this weekend. Checking out the SoCon standings, this is another big week. As you see, Wofford is only one game out of first place, and like we just mentioned, they play a top-ranked team this weekend. VMI and Mercer are still in the mix as well. A Terriers win could make a strong push for the SoCon to be a 2, maybe even 3-bid league team or league when it comes time for the FCS playoffs. Over in the Ancient 8, there's a 3-way tie for first place with Harvard, Princeton, and Penn all sitting at 2-0 in the Ivy League. Harvard and Princeton playing a big one in New Jersey this weekend and what promises to be an instant classic. Dartmouth is winless in the Ivy League so far after getting off to a great start to the season, and they are still undefeated in non-conference play. Now we'll take a look at what to expect this week as we peek over at the schedule. Cornell and Brown face off against one another and what could be a turning point for both squads this year. Brown needs a win in the worst way possible. This offense has done their part, but defensively, we're starting to see the effects of all the graduations from a season ago. The Bears are giving up about 30 points a game, and that's not going to get the job done no matter what level you play in. Now, the Big Red have to stop turning the ball over and close out games and learn to close out games. They have the talent, but they lack the consistency to finish. Again, this is a huge game for both teams. Welcome back to the FCS Kickoff presented by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook, and it's time to unveil our midseason top 25 in the FCS, and we'll start our rankings off by taking a look at the teams that just missed the cut.
As we look at who just missed the cut, you see some outstanding football programs on this list. Fordham has a big game this weekend against Georgetown, Sacred Heart, Weber State, and Harvard could find themselves making significant moves up our list with victories this weekend. 21 through 25 could easily be swapped with the teams that just missed a cut. That's how close they are. But what gives them the slight notch above is the fact that all the teams here, especially Samford, have won in a variety of ways. I think North Carolina Central is a very good football team that's getting healthy at the right time, and San Diego looks extremely strong coming out of the Pioneer League. 16 through 20 features two teams in Charleston Southern and South Dakota State that is in position to make a big leap in our rankings. Both teams are playing really good ball at this juncture of the season. Western Illinois has a chance to make a big move if they're able to knock off North Dakota State at home. And keep an eye on the Lehigh Mountain Hawks. Their offense is extremely tough to defend, and defensively they are getting much better. 11 through 15, I'm a big fan of both Tennessee State and North Carolina A&T. Both teams are amongst the strongest in the subdivision in my opinion. State has better and more consistent quarterback play, which is remarkable considering the fact that Ronald Butler started the season as the backup. The Fighting Hawks of North Dakota started this season in our top 10, and after a couple of close losses early on in the year, they find themselves right back on the cusp of getting back where they were at the start. Looking at 6 through 10, now you're starting to get into the physical football category. North Dakota State, Chattanooga, Central Arkansas, Youngstown State, and Montana all have the ability to beat you up in the trenches. When you're able to control the line of scrimmage like these teams can, it'll make you very tough to beat week in, week out. And finally, the top 5 sees Sam Houston State at number 1 and the Citadel at number 2. I know many will be surprised to see the Bulldogs ranked this high, but I think their defensive play is being vastly underrated right now by the rest of the country. What they did to Chattanooga's offense last week was highly impressive. Also, James Madison has rather quietly gone about their way of dominating opponents. Their defense was a big-time question mark last year and heading into the season, and all they've done was get better on that side of the ball. The same can be said for the Jacksonville State Gamecocks, who also had some defensive questions coming into the season, but they have also played well on that side of the ball this year. Eastern Washington and Sam Houston State has the offense that keeps defensive coordinators up at night, and it'll be interesting to see or to revisit these rankings at the conclusion of the regular season.
And for our Patriot League whip around, here's Chris Fichtel.
First, let's get into last week's action on the gridiron. The Colgate Raiders beat the Bucknell Bison 27-7 on the road. QB Jake Melville took over the game in the fourth quarter with 2 rushing touchdowns to lead the Raiders to victory. Running back Keon Washington also had his 3rd straight 100-yard game in the effort. Bucknell replaced quarterback Matt Moo with the backup at the half, but the result was the same after the change. The Raiders go to 2-4 with a 1-1 conference record, while the Bucknell has an identical record. The Fordham Rams beat Yale 44-37 at home. Fordham quarterback Kevin Anderson was named Patriot League Offensive Player of the Week for his efforts in this one, where he threw for 270 yards and 5 touchdowns, including 4 in the first half. Anderson spread the ball around to 8 different receivers and kept the defense guessing all day long. Chase Edmonds had another 100-yard rushing day, and Fordham won pretty comfortably. Fordham goes to 4-2 on the season. The Holy Cross Crusaders beat number 20 Harvard 27-17 at home. The football team and the men's ice hockey team both knocked off nationally ranked opponents, marking the first time in recorded school history that 2 different Holy Cross teams have defeated ranked foes on the same day. Holy Cross cruised to a 21-7 first quarter lead and then shut out the Crimson in the second half to preserve the victory. The win was the Crusaders' first victory over a ranked opponent since 2009. Holy Cross is 3-4 overall and 1-1 in the Patriot League. The Lehigh Mountain Hawks defeated the Georgetown Hoyas 35-3 on the road. Lehigh held the Hoyas to only 177 total yards and made it look more like a home game than a road game with the margin of victory. The Mountain Hawks offense stayed hot with major contributions from their receivers Pelletier and Casey. Lehigh leads the pack with a 5-2 record and a 2-0 conference record. Georgetown dropped to 500 with their 3rd loss in a row, and they are now 0-1 in the conference. The Lafayette Leopards lost to Army 62-7 on the road. Lafayette allowed 671 yards of offense, and they never really got on track against their first FBS opponent since 1997. Lafayette head coach Frank Tavani said it was the worst he had ever felt after a game. Luckily, next week, the Leopards will go back to facing FCS competition, and they will be on a more level playing field. On a better note, Drew Reed came back after 2 weeks out with a head injury, and he was able to throw the ball 36 times. Lafayette falls to 1-6 on the year. This Saturday in the Patriot League, all 3 games are conference matchups with early afternoon kickoffs. First, the Lehigh Mountain Hawks travel to Fitton Field to face the Holy Cross Crusaders at 12:05 p.m. The last matchup was a shootout, with Lehigh jumping out to a 41-10 halftime lead and holding on for a 51-38 victory back in November. They have now won 5 of the last 6 in this rivalry. Last week, the Mountain Hawks had their fewest points allowed since 2009, so they will look to keep that momentum going into this big battle. With 5 All-Patriot League players left on their team from last season, and with 5 wins in a row, the Mountain Hawks are surging at the right time and looking for the Patriot League title. Holy Cross has their family weekend, and they will be looking to put up a great effort against a great squad. This is the Crusaders' last home game of the season, and they will want to get back to 500 while they have the home field advantage. Crusaders linebacker Kyle Young was named Patriot League Defensive Player of the Week with 2 sacks and 2 forced fumbles, including one that was recovered for a touchdown. My player to watch is Lehigh quarterback Brad Mays. He's filling in for Nick Shafniski, and he hasn't missed a beat, helping them continue on their rise to the top. The Lafayette Leopards head to face the Bucknell Bison in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania at 1 p.m. These teams have met more times than any other duo in Bucknell's program history. Lafayette was Bucknell's only opponent way back in 1883, its first ever year of football. It is homecoming day on the Bucknell campus, and the Bison will look to get back to 500 all-time on homecoming. Bison quarterback John Chia-Rolanzio may have his work cut out for him because his older brother John is the assistant coach on the opposing Lafayette side. John had been a 4-year starter at Lafayette between 2011 and 2014, and he was a 2-time first-team All-Patriot League offensive lineman. If Bucknell does pull off the victory, though, they will have more wins than all of last season. The Leopards lost to Bucknell in overtime in their last meeting in Harrisburg back in 2014. The Bison lead the Patriot League in scoring defense at 22 points per game, but they're only 7th in scoring offense with 17 points per game. My player to watch this week is Bucknell running back Joey DeFloria, who will look to use the hometown crowd to his advantage and get over the 100-yard marker for the 4th time this season. I believe he'll get to that mark for sure. The Fordham Rams play host to the Georgetown Hoyas at Jack Coffey Field at 1 p.m. This is the 61st meeting in team history, with the Rams winning the last 4 meetings, including a 38-31 victory on the road last season. This year's meeting is sold out, and the fans know this is a really big game for both teams who are looking to stay in the title race. Fordham is still receiving votes in both polls, but they haven't been in the top 25 since their loss to Navy a few weeks ago. The Rams and Hoyas are 2 of the best teams in the country in terms of turnover margin, with Fordham 3rd and Georgetown 12th. Fordham has the 4th best scoring offense in the FCS, so it is clear they have been great on both sides of the ball all season long. Patriot League Offensive Player of the Week Kevin Anderson of Fordham has been playing great football lately by not turning the ball over and for throwing for a ton of touchdowns. He is my player to watch for this week, and I think he will take advantage of a Georgetown team that has now lost 3 games in a row after a 3-0 start to the season. Don't forget to look out for running back Chase Edmonds, who is always a candidate for the award, and I feel it could go to either of the 2 stars. With the FCS Kickoff on Football Gameplan, I'm Chris Fichtel.
The Southern Jaguars and Jackson State Tigers played in front of 33,000 fans last week, which is easily the highest attendance total this year in the FCS. The Jags ended up winning that ball game 20-24, but it's that level of excitement and turnout that you're likely to see this week in the SWAC, as there's some big-time games on the schedule. Texas Southern and Jackson State meet up in a big East versus West crossover game. Valley and Grambling are also on the schedule this weekend. The Delta Devils have an opportunity to pull off a monumental upset if they're able to knock off Grambling. Can Prairie View pull off the upset down in Houston, Texas as they take on the Rice Owls? As we peek at the SWAC standings, you can see why Jackson State and Texas Southern is a big game this week. The Tigers are trying to keep pace with the Alcorn State Braves, who looks like they righted the ship with 2 straight victories. Too bad Southern isn't eligible for the Celebration Bowl or SWAC title game because of APR violations, because they look really good this year. Despite that, they could still affect the bowl game by knocking off Grambling in the Bayou Classic at the end of the season. And keep an eye on Alabama State. The Hornets won last week and have a bye this week, which is perfectly timed as they look to make a strong finish in the East Division. This is shaping up to be a very good year at the top in the Ohio Valley Conference. Jacksonville State, Tennessee State, and Eastern Illinois all have 5 victories each, and 5 teams within the conference are over 500 in the conference standings. Now, the Tennessee State Tigers, in my opinion, have been the most impressive. TSU has done it with a solid offense, relying on their backup quarterback, Ronald Butler, a great defense led by stellar play in the secondary with Ezra Robinson, who picked off 2 passes in last week's victory over Eastern Kentucky, and they've done it with tremendous special teams play with kicker Lane Clark. Now this week we have some good conference battles as Murray State, led by quarterback KD Humphreys, takes on the red-hot Eastern Illinois Panthers. Jacksonville State and Eastern Kentucky is another big battle. Now while Eastern Kentucky may be in a down year, this is still a big game for the Gamecocks. And I like the matchup between Southeast Missouri State and Tennessee Tech. I feel as though this could be one of the more underrated matchups this week in the FCS. Over in the Southland Conference this week, as we look at the schedule, Lamar and Central Arkansas, Sam Houston State, Nichols, and quite honestly, McNeese and Northwestern State are the big games on the schedule. We also talked about earlier how Houston Baptist and Southeastern Louisiana being an upset alert game, as I like what I've seen defensively from the Huskies, especially at linebacker with Garrett Dolan. Now looking at the standings, Lamar and Nichols are only 1 game out of first place, as is Southeastern Louisiana. McNeese State has been a shocker this season, as this is a team that's usually battling Sam Houston State for the #1 spot. That's why this week's game versus Northwestern State is a crucial one for the Cowboys. This week, in my opinion, more so than every other week in the Southland Conference, will definitely be must-watch TV. For a look around the Missouri Valley Conference, here's Brian Sullivan.
This was certainly the most exciting week in Missouri Valley Conference so far this year, as all 5 games were decided by 4 points or less, including a double overtime game and 3 others that were won with 48-28 and a second to go. Let's start off by looking at the upset of the week, as South Dakota State went to Fargo, North Dakota, and knocked off the #1 Bison 19-17 to take home the Dakota Marker Trophy for the first time in 7 years. Jackrabbits quarterback Tyron Christian, who had 444 yards of total offense himself, including 303 yards passing and 141 yards rushing, hit NFL-ready wide receiver Jake Winicky for the 2-yard touchdown with 1 second left to cap off the upset after trailing 17-3. NDSU's defense managed to stop the Jackrabbits on 4 of 6 fourth-down tries, including 2 inside the Bison 5-yard line, but just couldn't hold SDSU high-powered offense at the end. With the win, the Jackrabbits are tied for first place in the conference and snapped an 8-game losing streak against the Bison. Now to Youngstown, Ohio, where Penguin Nation jumped into a tie for first place with their 14-10 comeback win against Northern Iowa. Youngstown State on their final drive ran the ball 10 consecutive times, which ended with a Martin Ruiz touchdown with 28 seconds left for the win. The Penguin Nation defense dominated for the second week in a row, as they had 6 sacks and held Northern Iowa to only 173 total yards. James Smith and Armand Delaverde each had 8 tackles, and Smith also had a forced fumble. To Western Illinois, where the Leathernecks came back to beat the Missouri Bears 38-35 on running back Devin Moore's second push touchdown on 4th and goal with 43 seconds left. The Bears, trailing 31-14, stormed all the way back to take a 35-31 lead on quarterback Brody Lambert's last of 5 TD passes, but the mighty Bears defense, which came so close to stopping Western Illinois, just couldn't hold on. Leathernecks defensive back Xavier Rowe's interception with 23 seconds to go sealed the game. With the win, Western Illinois snapped a 5-game losing streak to the Bears. To Terre Haute, Indiana, where South Dakota defeated Indiana State 33-30 in double overtime. Coyotes kicker Miles Bergner's 2 41-yard field goals in both overtimes, and defensive back Jacob Warner's interception at the goal line in the second overtime sealed the game for South Dakota. With the win, the Coyotes improved to 2-1 in double overtime games this season and is their first road win since they beat the Mighty Bisons last year. The Sycamores, down 10 with 2 minutes to go, scored on quarterback Isaac Harker's 23-yard pass, and a 42-yard field goal with 12 seconds left sent the game into overtime. Finally, to Illinois State, where the Redbirds won their first conference game of the year by defeating Southern Illinois 31-28. Illinois State quarterback Jake Colby threw for 3 touchdowns, and running back James Robinson ran for 122 yards and a score, while Salukis quarterback Josh Stroman threw for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns in the loss. With 5 weeks to go to playoff season, here's the Missouri Valley Conference standings. At the top, we have South Dakota State and Youngstown State, who are tied for first at 3-0 in the conference. Then is NDSU, Western Illinois, and South Dakota, all at 2-1. Then it's Missouri State and Northern Iowa at 1-2. And Illinois State and Indiana State are at 1-3. And rounding out the pack is Southern Illinois at 0-3. Now let's take a look at this week's games. Starting off by heading to Cedar Falls, where Northern Iowa hosts Missouri State as both teams look to even their conference record with a win and continue their playoff push. Northern Iowa looked to rebound after a disappointing offensive performance last week as quarterback Aaron Bailey looks to continue his magical season with his legs as he has 426 yards on the ground so far this season to go along with 882 yards passing. It won't be easy as they face an angry Bears defense that gave up 5 touchdowns last week and will be looking to put the fear back into opposing offenses, led by All-American linebacker Dylan Cole, who is third among all active FCS defenders and career tackles. On the other side of the ball, the Panthers defense, led by Carter Schultz, who is second in the FCS in career sacks, and Malcolm Washington, who leads the MVSC in interceptions, needs to find a way to stop the Bears offense, led by quarterback Brody Lambert, who had 5 TDs last week and is averaging 28 points per game. To South Dakota, where the Coyotes host Illinois State. South Dakota looks to continue their playoff push after last week's double overtime win as quarterback Chris Strevler, who was a dual threat with his arms and legs, will return this week after suffering a head injury in last week's game. If the Redbirds defense, which gave up 28 points last week, can't get any pressure on the quarterback, Strevler will have a career day. As far as Illinois State offense is concerned, they need another big game from freshman running back James Robinson, who has 2 straight over 100-yard games, NFL-ready wide receiver Anthony Warren, who had another touchdown last week, and quarterback Jake Colby, if the Redbirds hope to keep their slim playoff chances alive. To Carbondale, Illinois, where Southern Illinois hosts Indiana State in what will be an offensive shootout as each team looks to snap a 3-game losing streak. The Salukis will be looking for their first conference win of the year behind quarterback Josh Stroman, who continues to have his career year as he has over 1,800 yards with 13 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. He will go up against a Sycamores defense that has given up an average of 36 points per game. On the other side, the Sycamores will counter with the high-powered offense behind quarterback Isaac Harker's 15 touchdown passes, running back Roland Gennesee's 476 yards and 6 scores, and NFL-ready wide receivers Robert Tonyan's Jr.'s 7 TDs. If neither defense can stop these 2 high-powered offenses, we could potentially look at an over 100-point game. To Western Illinois, where number 4 NDSU looks to rebound after the heartbreaking last-second loss as they take on the number 12 Leathernecks in a battle of 2 second-place teams. The Bison, led by quarterback Easton Stick, who has 9 TDs this season, running back King Frazier, who has 464 yards and 5 touchdowns, and wide receiver R.J. Urzanowski, who is averaging 20.1 yards per catch, and that stout defense keeps the great South Dakota State offense in check for almost the entire game, will be out to make a big statement against the Leathernecks to show the entire FCS that they are still the team to fear. It won't be easy, however, as they face a Leathernecks team that will send out running back Steve McShane, who leads the MVSC in rushing yards per game with 108.3 yards, and over 3,000-yard receiver Lance Lenore, who is now third all-time in receptions in conference history. The Leathernecks will be the sixth top 25 teams that Bison played this season, which ties them for a regular season high they set themselves in 2014. And finally, in the game of the week, number 7 South Dakota State, off their huge upset of the Bison last week, hosts number 12 Youngstown State, coming off their come-from-behind victory and a battle of first-place supremacy. This game will pit the high-powered Jackrabbits offense versus the scary Penguin Nation defense, which has yet to give up a rushing touchdown this season. The Jacks are led by superstar quarterback Tyron Christian, who leads the MVSC and is fourth in the FCS in passing efficiency with 173.2 rating and 22 touchdowns and only 2 INTs to go along with 170 yards rushing and 2 scores. They also have a dual receiving threat that is tearing up the league in NFL-ready wide receiver Jake Winicky, who has 11 TDs and is averaging 117 yards per game, to go along with tight end Dallas Goedert, who has 9 scores and is averaging 118 yards per game. They face a smothering Penguin Nation defense that is anchored by NFL-ready defensive end Derek Rivers, who ranks number 1 all-time in the FCS for career sacks with 31.5. He is joined by Jameel Smith and Armand Delavad, who each had 8 tackles last week, and Savon Smith, who had 2 sacks and 5 tackles as well, while holding Northern Iowa to only 9 first downs the entire game and only 1 in the second half. On the offensive side, Penguin Nation's ground and pound attack is led by running back Martin Ruiz, who has 494 yards and leads the team with 7 touchdowns and could have a tremendous day against the Jackrabbits defense. Either way, this is going to be a tough, hard-fought battle in which the MVSC will have a new, standalone first-place team. Now it's time to give out the MVSC Awards of the Week. Starting off with Offensive Player of the Week and Stats National Offensive Player of the Week, South Dakota State's star quarterback Tyron Christian, who had 444 total yards and 2 touchdowns, including a game winner with 1 second to go. He became the first SDSU quarterback to rush and pass for over 100 yards in the same game. The Defensive Player of the Week goes to Illinois State defensive tackle Dalton Keene, who did it all as he finished with 9 tackles, 1.5 sacks, forced fumble, and blocked a field goal in their victory. Newcomer of the Week goes to South Dakota State's linebacker Christian Roseboom, who recorded a team-high 12 tackles and had a key sack in the 4th quarter in their victory. And finally, Special Teams Player and Stats National Special Teams Player Award goes to South Dakota kicker Miles Bergner, who had 4 field goals, including 2 in overtime, kicked 3 extra points, had 5 touchbacks, and averaged 42.8 yards on 9 punts, including 2 over 50 yards. Now, if you still haven't joined the FCS revolution, just go under hashtag #FearTheFCS.
There's never a shortage of points scored when you're talking about the Big Sky Conference, but Weber State, Eastern Washington, and Montana are red hot right now, can dump points on you in a hurry. And we'll get some good conference matchups this week as we take a look at the schedule. Now, Montana versus Northern Arizona should be a good one. Weber State versus Southern Utah is a pivotal one. And I'm always intrigued by Cal Davis, as I think they're a program heading in the right direction as they face a tough Cal Poly Mustangs. Now, looking at the standings, I'm still not ready to bury the Montana State Bobcats just yet. Despite their 4-game losing streak, at some point you have to think that they'll get things turned around in conference and get a victory. Now, North Dakota is proving once again how strong they are, winners of 5 straight games. The Fighting Hawks are a few plays away, not games, but plays from being undefeated on the season. At the midway point, the Big Sky has 5 teams making a strong case for a playoff berth. So that's it for this week's episode of the FCS Kickoff presented by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook, and be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts. And always make sure you download our FCS Opening Drive podcast, which you can find on iTunes. And for more FCS Whip Around coverage, Follow us on Twitter at the FCS Kickoff.